All right, what's going on, everybody? How you doing on this Lord's Day? I hope your day's going well. Don't mind the chat box on the screen. This was from yesterday's live stream. Um, it's supposed to reset, but it didn't. But maybe if I put me my first chat in here, let me see if it happens. Let me see if it resets itself. So what's going on, everybody? Let me see if that resets the bad boy. Or does it just add on to what was already there? Oh, just add it on. As if this was a continuing a conversation from before. How nice is that? That's interesting. See, I figured on the Streamlabs. Well, I guess if I was doing this on Streamlabs OBS, then it would automatically reset like it always does. But because I have this URL plugged into this OBS software, it's just continuing on. Which I mean, I really don't mind. And it ain't that big of a deal, but it is what it is. Now I'm using OBS versus Streamlabs because it doesn't use up all my computer power and all that kind of good stuff. So that's mainly the reason why. All right. So on this evening, I want to discuss what is critical race theory. And what we're going to do, we're going to put up a couple sites. We're going to read off of there where it talks about critical race theory and how briefly how it came about, and a little bit on intersectionality. That's what we're going to look at. I just want to look at something real quick. Gonna check something out. Make sure stream is going over fine. Okay, it is. Cool. All right, that works. And so now I'm gonna mute my mic so I won't hear myself. I'm not finna take any calls right now. All right. So I take it that you can still hear me fine and hear me okay. And I'm just not hearing myself, so it won't distract me. Now, as I wait, I'm trying to see if anybody else will come on it. But in the meantime, as usual, I'm gonna do the episode on what we originally scheduled it for, and if any comments, anything like that, I will address it in the midst of the break when I'm playing commercials and all that kind of good stuff, and we'll jump back into it. Just like last week, I know we did Deuteronomy 28 verse 68, dealing with that prophecy about the transatlantic slave trade and so on and so forth. But just like in that stream, it wasn't a long one. I don't plan on being that long with this one as well. But if there are some good comments that I feel that needs to be addressed within the actual podcast itself, I will do that. But this one mainly just to read off of some stuff I saw online, which I don't think anybody who's on the social justice side of things would disagree with as far as what critical race theory is. I want to, and I'm going to address a little bit about the assumption of it being just a set of analytical tools. I'm going to briefly address that, and we'll go from there. All right. So I hope this, as always, be helpful and encouraging to someone and challenging as well. And as always, there's always more that we can say and on the subject. But I hope this just gets you started as far as looking into this topic. So let me start my recording, and we'll be on our way. All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Prescribed Truth. I'm Jamal Bandy, the one who seeks to distribute the truth that the doctor prescribes to the church and the world today. This is episode 74, coming on up to that 100. If you'd like to contact me, you can do so by emailing me at prescribed.truth@gmail.com, or you can call me and leave a voicemail at 801-980-6333. That's 801-980-6333. If you'd like to support this ministry financially, you can do so by joining with me on Patreon at patreon.com/prescribe truth. For just $1 or more a month, you can help support this live stream and this podcast and any other content that we do on Prescribed Truth. You will help support that, and I greatly appreciate it. I would like to give a shout out to a brand new patron. Ralph has joined the patron community. Thank you so much, Ralph, for your contribution. I really greatly appreciate it, and you too also can join if you would like to support this work. If not, as always, I appreciate your prayers. On today's show, what I want to get into is dealing with, as the title suggests, what is critical race theory? Now, I know this subject has been talked about over and over again. You can go on YouTube and find so many videos that talks about what is critical race theory. You can look online and Google what is critical race theory and find so much on this subject. And so what I would like to do is read off of some of those things and just have a discussion about it, let you know what my thoughts are, and go from there. We're going to look at a couple websites. One site in particular we're going to look at as far as just defining critical race theory and what it is. And it gives us a brief look at intersectionality. And also we're going to get into where critical race theory stems from, which is critical legal studies. So we're going to take a look at that as well. And I'm going to show that on the screen for those who watch YouTube Live. And you can watch YouTube Live. You listen to this on various podcast apps. You can watch this live stream video on YouTube on Sundays at 6 p.m. Eastern time. All right. So we will show the screen and look at the websites together. And I'm going to read off some things. And so I welcome you to leave comments and let me know what you think about this subject, about these things we're going to bring up. If there's more that you think that should be added to this conversation that I may miss tonight, please comment. Let me know what your thoughts are in the reviews and whatnot. I greatly appreciate it. So without holding us any longer, let's go ahead and look at the first website we're going to take. Yo, okay. Man, I said a whole lot. I know what happened. Thank you, Nathan, for commenting that, brother. Thank you. I didn't see it at first because I was reading from the website, but I'm glad I did check back in. But thankfully, I didn't go that deep into the podcast where I missed it. And it's I'm thankful that even though it wasn't caught here, it's caught in the audio that I'm recording from, so I don't have to repeat it for my podcast portion of it. And so let me do this real quick. Let me copy this mic output onto the other screen. I knew it was gonna be something I forget. All right, testing 1 2, testing. So now let me know here. Do you hear me now? You should hear me now, but let me know. Do you hear me now? Sunbeam Forever, how you doing? Oh, say it works now. You say you stepped out, came back in. Yeah, it's like when I switched this screen, and that's what I like about the difference between Streamlabs and using OBS. See, Streamlabs, it'll plug my mic, and then no matter what no matter what scene I'm on, the microphone will automatically carry over. But in OBS, I have to make sure I manually put the mic input in onto the other screens, other scenes, whatever. So it is what it is. But I forgot to do that. That's something I should have caught. So thank you for pointing it out, brother. And so we here. Sunbeam Forever, how you doing? Nathan, so properly, brother, how you doing? Thank you for coming in when you did, because had you not had commented, had you not have been here, I would have been continuing on this conversation and not even knowing that you guys couldn't even hear me on this particular scene. So we're there. So I don't mind repeating what I said. I didn't say as much, and when I got to the screen, I just started off reading and everything else. So that's all good. That's all good. So let me start over where I was at. All right. So now read up what it says. Critical race theory is the view that race, instead of being biologically grounded and neutral, is socially constructed, and that race as a socially constructed concept functions as a means to maintain the interests of the white population that constructed it. Now, what I was saying before was that I actually agree with that. Like that, race in itself, how we have race as a social construct, it's true. It was based off of racism. I did a podcast some time ago dealing with the Zondervan Bible, Compact Bible Dictionary that the Hebrew Israelites like to use when it comes to defining Ham, who Ham is. In that definition, it gives Ethiopia and all these other places in Africa. But when it comes to it gets to a point where it says that Ham is not the Negroes. Like it gives the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, some the Libyans, but then it says not the Negroes, and so Hebrew Israelites will look at that and it's like, oh, see, we can't be Ham because it says not the Negroes, but we must be of Shem. That's the only other option, right? But what they don't understand is that definition was placed there based off of scientific racism, where there were scientists back then who would measure skulls and they would automatically conclude that people who had bigger skulls were smarter, and therefore they must have been Caucasian, right? Because there was three different classes. You had Caucasoid, Negroid, and Mongoloid, and therefore if you were Caucasoid, your skull must have been bigger than the Mongoloid and the Negroid. And there were smaller skulls, then it must have been the Negroid because they saw them as being less smart. They were dumb. That's how they saw it. So they felt like the Egyptians had to be Hamites, right? Because the Egyptians had these tall structures, these pyramids and everything else. Like, how could they have all this innovation within their civilization and yet be Negroid? They couldn't. They had to have been white. And so Caucasians believed that the Hamites were actually white. That's what they believed. They believed they were white. You know what I'm saying? And so that's where you have that. That's why the definition says not the Negroes. All right. And so I addressed that in the podcast I did a while back. But, so I do agree with that. Like this was a socially constructed concept that came about to push racism of the scientific form in that sense, because we know biblically speaking there's no such thing as race. There's different ethnicities, but no such thing as race. We're all part of one human race. That's it. I should have said there's no such thing as different races as far as human beings. Like we're all one human race. All right, our only difference between me and my brother Nathan and anyone else is that we have different levels of melanin in our skin. That's it. My brother Nathan is melanin deficient. That's it. He's melanin deficient, and I'm melanin efficient. Like that's the difference. That's the only difference. Saying we all the same color. It's just different shades. That's really the truth. If you think about it, we're all the same pigment. It's just that we're just different colors. I mean, we're just different shades. And so that's just the reality of that. So I do agree with that, that portion of this article. And so it says that according to critical race theory, racial inequality emerges from the social, economic, and legal differences that white people create between races to maintain elite white interests in labor markets and politics, and as such create the circumstances that give rise to poverty and criminality in many minority communities. Now, I was saying earlier how I somewhat disagree with this, and now I was getting to this point before I found out that you couldn't hear me, is I'm finna let you know why. So the reason why I disagree with this is that it's so blanketed. We're not told what labor markets are created to make that distinction between elites and non-elites as far as whites and non-whites. What laws, what policies, which ones? Because see, before the civil rights movement, we can point out these policies, we can point out these issues after slavery had ended, or during the time before slavery had ended, where blacks could not read. It was against the law for them to learn to read and to write. Like these were policies and put in place to bring them down, to keep them down. We can point to those things as definites as to what actually kept them down, and even as to the not being able to vote and not, all that kind of stuff like that. We can point to those things. But when you have a statement like that, it's so blanketed. And this is an article. I know the article, to be honest, is not trying to give us a breakdown of everything. But even when you have conversations with people about critical race theory and about these issues, about this theory, as it is a theory, they can't point to what do we have now that is socially and economically constructed to be against blacks and against basically people of color? What is there? I have people point to the fact that they can't get loans like someone else, or we're talking about wages and jobs, and even talking about the criminal system and everything else. But when you look at those stats as what they stand for, the stats don't match the narrative is what's been put out. It just doesn't. It doesn't. And so we talk about labor markets, and okay, what about the labor markets? The fact of who's employed and who's making the most, and they're working the same position, yet one's making more than the other, or what we have going on, or is it that whites only have the opportunities to make this kind of money on this particular level, or blacks are not able to make that kind of money? Like, what are we talking about? What are we getting into it? And we have to be able to define these things and be able to point these things out, because I'll be one, if there is racism present in how a system is constructed and how something is brought up, how a job is created and everything else, then I'll be one on the front line and fight alongside you and say, you know what, this is wrong, right? We would stand together side by side and acknowledge that this is wrong. But the thing is that when you actually look for specifics in these areas, there isn't any that we can point to today. We had them back then. We can point them out back then. Even I did a podcast dealing with early America and how the misconceptions of early America, how there were blacks who owned slaves as well as the whites who owned slaves. So is slavery in itself in America just about racism? No, we can't say that. Was it the case with some? Yeah, we can definitely say that, but not as a whole. But then we went into after slavery had ended, or no. Let's go back. After America got its independence, sometime after that you had whites who were slaves too, who now are not slaves, because now it was against the law for them to have whites as being slaves. Whites were all free, and then you had only the blacks being slaves, even though there are black people who own black slaves as well. But that's what the case was, and you can see an issue there, right? You can see there's a level of racism here in the South where it's like, okay, we're no longer going to have whites being slaves because we're better. No, therefore, blacks going to be the slaves. So we saw that. That is true. That's evident, right? Then slavery ended. So the laws that was put in place, Jim Crow and everything else, we can point to those things. And then, but what is it today? What is it in the 2000s? What is it in the 1990s and up? What is it that we can point to say, you know what, this is still an issue today, whereas whites have such a way where blacks can't get ahead? Where do we have that? When we look at the criminality of minorities, when people commit crimes, it's not all the time. It's not, even if you look at majority of people who are in jail, it ain't because they just ain't got the opportunities to be able to go out there and get work and work hard, and then therefore they gotta resort to crime. No, they want a quick way. They want an easy way. Drugs, they want easy money, and they end up using, whatever the case may be. It's what they want, because working hard is too hard. That's a reality. That's reality, man. I'm not the richest man. I'm not rich by no stretch of the imagination. You know what I'm saying? I got bills out the yin yang, but I'm working hard. I don't have to resort to drugs. I don't have to resort to stealing in order to get by in life. Praise God. And we can thank God for that. But so criminality is not because there's some laws. I mean, some white people who are making themselves elite, and therefore blacks feel like that's the only thing they can do is go and commit crimes. Even in, you talk about disparate neighborhoods where it seems like it's just poverty stricken and everything else. How many success stories do we have of blacks who come out of communities like that and able to make something of themselves, even though they may not have had a father in the home, even though mama may not have had the money to make sure they can have the name brand clothes and this and that and the third, or have their first car, and they had to ride the bus all the time. Like, how many success stories that come out of that? And you say, well, all because it's a few, it doesn't mean anything. No, it does. It means a lot. Because what is the difference between that person and the next person? It ain't that black person was afforded opportunities that the other person was, that they both were afforded the same opportunities. It's what they were done with it. It's what was done with it. So that's why I disagree with that line. We can point to some issues, right? We can point to some stuff, but it's not a whole. We can't, and it would be an error to make it as if like this is always the case, and it is such the case that it's such an issue that hasn't been addressed, like it hasn't been addressed already. And then it says, though the intellectual origins of the movements go back much further, The critical race theory movement officially organized itself in July 1989. That was a year after I was born. It said despite the relatively relatively appearance of critical race theory in academia, some scholars have found it a valuable perspective on race and racism in America. Critical race theory launched what many race scholars now take as a common sense view. And this is how it's addressed in today. Like when you're dealing with people and you talk about this subject, like this should be common sense. This is why me as an African American speaking against this theory is like you must be dumb. Like you must be out your mind. Like you cannot be thinking straight. You must be influenced by the white man. It has to be that because this right here should be common sense. Like you should look at history and it should tell you that this is true. This is not just a theory. This is truth. And so let me go ahead and segue into thinking and let you know that the idea that critical race theory is just a set of analytical tools is a lie. A lie. Critical race theory does not come with the notion of saying, hey, let's gather the information and then let's see if it holds up. Critical race theory comes in with the notion that this is the conclusion. Like this is the conclusion. This is not a set of tools to sit and gather information. No, the information has already been gathered and this is the conclusion. Hence it being a theory. They're theorizing why things are the way they are. Why the economics the way it is. Why is the jail rates the way it is and everything else. It's because of this, because of white supremacy, this privilege. It's a conclusion. All right, so it says critical race theory scholars or CRT scholars hold that the laws and policies in the United States are biased against people of color, and they have focused their scholarship on demonstrating the ways in which the legal institutions support that bias. Once again, just like I was bringing up earlier, how are the bias against people of color? The laws and policies. What laws and what policies that exist in the United States are biased against people of color? Because in the government, they would argue that their laws go the same for everybody, that the policies fit the bill for everybody. But critical race theory says otherwise. My question then to challenge it is what laws, what policies? And you notice in today's arena of politics, you're dealing with immigration laws and stuff like that, and dealing with LGBTQ and everything else. You're seeing how they're trying to implement these biases. It's stretching far beyond critical race and going into just critical theory, not just critical race theory, but critical theory as a whole. It just feeding into it, because now the laws and policies are affecting these people groups, right? These people who want to have same-sex marriages and stuff like that, and wanting to have the women's the feminism, the feminist rights. Even creeping into the church, the SBC, and talking about women pastors and everything else. Something that's clear in the scriptures for over centuries, and not that man came up with, but God Himself come up with, and we're going against that because of critical theory. And so here you have your race issues, then you have your sexual attractions or sexual orientation issues. You have your economic issues versus poor versus the wealth, being the rich and stuff like that. You have all of these different issues. So we're just going into critical theory, but it feeds it. And people don't realize that when you're buying into critical race theory, you are still buying into critical theory. You're buying into all of it. Like you have to bend for all of it. You can't just say, "Oh, I'm for critical race," but they leave out the rest of it, because the same argument that's used for critical race is used for critical theory and the rest of them. So that's just a reality. And so, real quick, I'm gonna read this, and then read this paragraph, and then we're gonna go into another website. It says the launch of the critical race theory movement in 1989 marked its separation from critical legal studies. We're going to look at that in a brief moment. The theory established at a conference in 1977 that rethinks and overturns accepted norms and standards in legal practice and theory. Instead of drawing theories of social organization and individual behavior from continental European thinkers such as GWF Hegel and Karl Marx, or psychoanalytical analytic figures. So I'm gonna say that again: psychoanalytic figures like Sigmund Freud, or I think that's Freud. I can't even Freud. I'm gonna go with that as its theoretical predecessors, as CLS and feminist jurisprudence. Ain't these words? I tell you the truth. Boy, they use some words. Uh, Jurisprudence had done. CRT was inspired by the American civil rights tradition through figures such as Martin Luther King Jr. and W.E.B. Du Bois. So I'm gonna read that again. Um, CRT, critical race theory, was inspired by the American civil rights tradition through figures such as Martin Luther King Jr. and W.E.B. Du Bois, and from nationalist thinkers such as Malcolm X, the Black Panthers, and Frantz Fanon. Being steeped in radical black thoughts and nationalist thinking, critical race theory advanced theoretical understandings of the law, politics, and American sociology that focus on the efforts of white people, Euro Americans, to maintain their historical advantages over people of color. And so, I once again in the podcast I did before dealing with Martin Luther King, I brought this out. Even in the civil rights movement, it was steeped in dealing with critical race theory. It was based off of critical race theory, which will go into Marxism. Only difference is we're talking about Marxism was dealing with economics, and Martin Luther King was bringing it into race, but still dealing with economics. Martin Luther King said in one of his letters that he won't rest, he will not feel satisfied until a black man is making the same amount as a white man. He won't rest until that's a reality. So I mean that's what he was looking at. So he looked at it from a standpoint of Marx, but see, Marx wasn't dealing with race; he was just mostly dealing with the poor and the rich. And Martin Luther King borrowed from that, but he didn't want to, as he said in his letter dealing with, or his sermon dealing with communism, he agreed with the outcome of communism, but just not in their method of how to go about it. That was his stance of that. All right, so I'm gonna take a look at some comments real quick. The brother of your life. What's up, Edwin? Grace and peace, brother. All right, so no, not much comments there since the time I came on. All right, cool. So I continue. All right, so this one comes from a website called Spacers at WordPress.com. This is an article. I'm trying to see do it have an author name on it. I don't see an author's name, but I just figured the information here on intersectionality was interesting, so I wanted to read off of it. But anyway, I will put these links in the description as well as far as the websites I go to. So in this next website we're looking at, it says, what is critical race theory? We already read a little bit about what is critical race theory, so we're going to look at intersectionality. All right. So it says intersectionality within critical race theory points to the multi-dimensionality of oppressions and recognizes that race alone cannot account for disempowerment. All right. So where you had critical theory, now keep in mind you had critical legal studies, right? Then where you had from there a branch out is critical race theory. Then another branch out comes intersectionality, and so it's the same thing, right? Now we were dealing with the laws, which is critical legal studies that's dealing with the laws, but then you have critical race is dealing with racism. Then you have intersectionality is dealing with more than just racism, dealing with different types of things. All right. So and then with intersectionality, if you it's basically like you have if you are oppressed in multiple areas of what you hold to or what you deem yourself to be, then you are more oppressed than the next person. So me being an African American male, well, if there's an African American female, she's more oppressed than I am. Okay, so I'm more oppressed than the white man, but I am less oppressed than the black woman. All right. Then you add into that whether someone is homosexual, bisexual, or lesbian, or queer, whatever the case may be. Now if they are black woman and lesbian, Now they are more oppressed than the black woman, so on and so forth. So you have all these different intersections. All right. So as it says, it's a multi dimensionality of oppressions, and recognizes that race alone cannot account for disempowerment. So it ain't just because you're black that you may not get the job, or you may not make enough money, or you may not have the rights. It's because you could be a woman too. It's because you could be black and a woman. It's because you be black, woman, and lesbian. And so these are things that keeping you from having any kind of power. So now, what what these ideas are going to set to do, or set to try to do, is try to make it where at the top, who are now the elite, will be those who are lesbian and queer and woman and black. I mean, and disabled. I guess you could put disabled in there too, like all of that, and the who are poor. So now they will be made rich. And it's funny because once the poor are now made rich, they lose that intersection. They lose that intersection, but yet they still have the rest of them. So I guess they still be more. So I guess, but that's the thing. Is like that's what they want to be put up. They want to have them be empowered, right? So, and if you buy into critical race theory, you have to buy into intersectionality, because they use the same argument. They're using the same argument, and what's true for one is going to be true for the others. Now, as it continues to say, intersectionality means the examination of race, sex, class, national origin, and sexual orientation, and how their combination plays out in various settings. This is an important tenet in pointing out that critical race theory is critical of the many oppressions facing people of color, and does not allow for one-dimensional approach of the complexities of our world. So, and look at this, y'all. What oppressions? What oppressions are the? When you talk about legal, keep in mind critical race theory and critical legal studies and all this is dealing with laws and policies. It's not just talking about how people treat another. Like, how you may have one person who just hates gays and they just go out there and just spewing all kind of hate rhetoric and everything else. This is not dealing with that. You're not talking about the one who's just racist and they just hate blacks and browns and they just go out there and spewing racist rhetoric. Same thing with blacks going out and spewing racist rhetoric against whites. This is not what critical race theory is dealing with, or intersectionality is dealing with. Well, keep in mind, it's talking about empowerment, being able to hold positions and power and wealth and everything else. This is what this is dealing with. All right. So my question then is, what oppressions, what legal policies are there that are against the LGBTQ that they find is oppressing them? Now, automatically with the LGBTQ, we know one of them is dealing with marriage equality. They want to be able to marry who they want to marry. Right. So that means we're having to disengage or just redefine what marriage is in order to fit what they deem they are being oppressed by, because they don't have that right in certain places. And so that's an oppression. They would consider that an oppression. All right. Not that something is not created just to keep them at bay. Keep in mind, when the blacks weren't allowed to read and weren't able to write, these were laws put in place to keep them down, put in place to keep them dumb, keep them where they could not understand things, keep them from reading the Bible, to teach them their freedom and their liberation in Christ. These things were put in place. The fact that blacks couldn't vote, that was put in place so they would not have representation like that. Those things were put in place. But see, when you think about marriage, that was something that was already in place before they even came about. God created marriage with Adam and Eve from the beginning, before there was any same-sex attraction that was ever mentioned, that was ever happened. Already, God already established what marriage was supposed to be. And so this is something that isn't oppressing them. This is something that is actually just true. True, the one who created us. And you get into what they call other oppressions. Now, we named some stuff that was then before them today. What laws or policies are put in place to keep blacks down, to keep Hispanics down, to keep LGBT down, and everything else? What laws are there to treat them less than human? We have to point those things out. And we talk about in the prison system, justice systems. What is put in place to say that only the blacks are being caught for these things, and they are given more sentences than the whites, who commit the same crimes, who do the same things? the stats don't add up to that theory. That's why critical race is only a theory. It's a theory. It's not an analytical tool. It's a theory. And the only reason why it can still be called a theory is because it's not proven. It's not proven. But they want to continue to keep pushing the narrative until they can make people believe that it has been proven. And it hasn't. That's why it's still a theory. All right, so real quick, I talked a little bit about it a couple times. So we're going to look at critical legal studies, and this is where critical race theory stems from. And so I thought it was important to mention it towards the end. But before we do that, we're going to play a couple commercials, and we'll come back. We're going to look at critical legal studies. So be right back.
Ephesians chapter 4, verse 25. Therefore, laying aside falsehood, speak truth, each one of you with his neighbor, for we are members of one another for his name's sake.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jamal Bandy, the host of the Prescribed Truth Podcast, where I seek to distribute the truth that the doctor prescribes to the church and the world today. The Lord graciously brought me out of a cult in 2010, saved me in 2013, and in 2017, Prescribed Truth began. My mission has been to spread the truth of God's word while refuting dangerous lies affecting most churches and the culture at large from a biblical and reformed perspective. Join me on Sundays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time for the live recording of the podcast on YouTube, and download the audio version wherever podcasts can be found, including the Christian podcast community. If you would like to know more about Prescribed Truth, please visit my website at prescribedtruth.com. And remember, this world is full of errors, but the only thing that the doctor prescribes is truth. Blessings.
What's up, everyone? This is James Watkins, host of the Five Solas podcast and founder of Five Solas Ministries. Be sure to check out our podcast that releases every Thursday on your favorite podcasting app as we discuss Christian doctrine and dive into the Reformed theological distinctives and their continued relevance for the church and world today. Grace alone, faith alone, Christ alone, Scripture alone, to the glory of God alone. Join us each episode as we discuss the truths of these foundational rallying cries of the Protestant reformers and how this material helps challenge and direct the current church in its life of worship and witness. Visit us online at www.fivesolasministries.com. That's www.5solasministries.com to learn more information about the ministry and to also check out our awesome Five Solas lineup of t-shirts and gospel tracts. And as always, may all that you do be done to the glory of God. Soli Deo Gloria.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We're back again. Real quick, I know we just played some commercials for you, and Sunbeam, you may can appreciate this, but there's a podcast that I highly recommend that you listen to, Theology Gals. Theology Gals, you should check them out. I highly recommend you listen to them, and not just Sunbeam because she's a lady, but anybody. I recommend even my brothers go check out Theology Gals, man. The episodes that they have is really good. Really check them out. Colleen Sharp and I think Angela Whitehorn, if I pronounce the name right. But yeah, check them out, man. They're pretty good people. All right. So where we left off at, looking at critical race theory, and we looked at intersectionality and what that means, and I gave my thoughts on those two things. And we're going to finish off tonight's podcast dealing with critical legal studies, and this is where critical race theory branches off from. As I mentioned in the first website we looked at, that critical race theory separated from critical legal studies. All right, it was like, well, if I'm not mistaken, it was 1970s, the late 1970s. It broke away from critical legal studies into critical race, and so so we're going to look at critical legal studies and what that entailed, as far as dealing with the laws and policies and stuff like that. So I wasn't checking to see y'all can see all the screen that I was doing. Let me see something, because y'all can't see all that. Should have had that fixed. So I apologize for those who are watching. If while I was reading off a website and you couldn't see, apologize for that. All right, so looking at critical legal studies movement, and we're gonna. Matter of fact, I think I'm gonna read down to the part where it says indeterminacy. I'm I'm not going to read all of this. There's a lot here. So I'm not going to read all this. I'm just going to read this beginning portion here. But I thought it was pretty good. All right. So now for the benefit of those who listen on the podcast. All right, welcome back. Right now, we're going to look at critical legal studies. As we talked about before, we dealt with critical race theory and what it means, and dealt with intersectionality and what it means, and how it's playing in our culture today. And I gave some of my thoughts on it. But I want to look at critical legal studies, and the reason why is because this is where critical race theory branches off from, and intersectionality branches off from critical race theory, and so on and so forth. It's just like a domino effect. And so we're going to look at critical legal studies. All right, so the website we're looking at now is cyber.harvard.edu, and it's dealing with critical legal studies movement. And I will put the links in the description, in the episode notes and in the description. So it starts off and it says the critical legal studies movement is a self-conscious group of legal scholars it says a self-conscious group of legal scholars founded the Conference on Critical Legal Studies in 1977. Most of them had been law students in the 1960s and early 1970s and had been involved with the civil rights movement, Vietnam protests, and the political and cultural challenges to authority that characterized that period. These events seem to contradict the assumption that American law was fundamentally just and the product of historical progress. Instead, law seemed a game heavily loaded to favor the wealthy and powerful. But these events also suggested that grassroots activists and lawyers could produce social change. So you see here that this whole thing is dealing with laws, right? It started with dealing with laws. That the American laws, it did not come from the idea that everything is just. Like they have to have a bias. There's a bias in the legal system. There's a bias when it comes to policies that are being made, all right, to benefit the wealthy and not the poor. All right, so this is where it starts off in critical race theory. You can just see when you just add elements and how critical race theory comes out, because you add the element of race, then you add elements of being a woman versus a man. So you're dealing with gender. Then you have sexual orientation. So you add these elements to the idea of critical legal studies. All right, so you just see how it just branches off, and that these activists can make change. They can make social change. All right, so it says fundamentally convinced that law and politics could not be separated, the founders of CLS found a yawning absence at the level of theory. How could law be so tilted to favor the powerful, given the prevailing explanations of law as either democratically chosen or the result of impartial judicial reasoning from neutral principles? Yet, how could law be a tool for social change in the face of Marxist explanations of law as mere I hate when they have these words. I mean, you know what? I am tired of this. What I'm gonna do? I'm gonna take this word here. I know this is phenomenal. It's epiphenomenal. I'm gonna take that. Epiphenomenal. There we go. Marxist explanations of law as mere epiphenomenal outgrowths of the interests of the powerful. Now, just for the sake of this is just for those who are watching live. I'm going to take this word. I'm going to see what this word actually means. Epiphenomenalism is the view that mental events are caused by physical events in the brain, but have no effects upon any physical events. Behavior is caused by muscles that contract upon receiving neutral impulses, and neutral impulses are generated by input from other neurons or from sense organs. Interesting. I just learned something new. Praise God. So, wow. Epiphenomenalism is the view that mental events are caused by physical events in the brain, but have no effects upon the physical events. Wow. All right. I just see how this just gets rid of the idea of how God says our minds are made and our issue with sin and our need to have our hearts changed and all of that. It's just our neurons acting up. That's what that is. Oh, interesting. Cool. All right, so going back, I'm gonna reread this sentence now, knowing what this is saying. Yet, how could law be a tool for social change in the face of Marxist explanations of law as mere epiphenomenal outgrowths of the interests of the powerful? Wow. Hosting annual conferences and workshops between 1977 and 1992, CLS scholars and those they have influenced try to explain both why legal principles and doctrines do not yield determinate answers to specific disputes, and how legal decisions reflect cultural and political values that shift over time. They focused from the start on the ways that the law contributed to illegitimate social hierarchies, producing domination of women by men, non-whites by whites, and the poor by the wealthy. I'm gonna reread that again. They focused from the start on the ways that law contributed to illegitimate social hierarchies, producing domination of women by men, non-whites by whites, and the poor by the wealthy. They claim that apparently neutral language and institutions operated through law mask relationships of power and control. The emphasis on individualism within the law similarly hides patterns of power relationships while making it more difficult to summon up a sense of community and human interconnection. Joining in their assault on these dimensions of law, CLS scholars have differed considerably in their particular methods and views. Wow. So just stuff that we've already been saying concerning critical race theory and intersectionality. So it's just basically you're just seeing a framework of that, the building block of all of this. And it says many who identify with the critical legal studies movement resist or reject efforts to systematize their own work. So they don't look at it. It says many, not all, but many of them don't look at it to see systems change. Right now, we know a lot of people who are especially dealing in the church and everything. We're hearing about people who are looking to make this a systematic change. But there are many who are from the critical legal studies movement who weren't trying to make it a systematized thing. They seek to, we'll continue to read, they seek to express claims of textual ambiguity and historical contingency in their own methods. Influenced by postmodernist developments in cultural studies, these critical scholars prefer episodic interventions to systematized theories. All right, so they're looking for smaller change, like little small implements of change. Some critical scholars press hard on a particular line of argument and then shift away from it in order to avoid treating the argument itself as a kind of fetish or talisman, fetish or talisman. Some critical scholars adapt ideas drawn from Marxist and socialist theories to demonstrate how economic power relationships influence legal practices and consciousness. All right, so now you see how Marxism plays in this. All right, so you can say all day that you hold to critical theory, yet you're not a Marxist, but that Marxist idea plays into all of this. They draw from it. All right. It just went into a different area. Whereas Marxism was dealing with economics, this went into legal practices, and then from legal practices into politics, dealing from race, and then with everything else. It just grows. It's like a fungus, just spreading to different areas. All right, it says for others, the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory and its attention to the construction of cultural and psychosocial meanings are central to explaining how law uses mechanisms of denial and legitimation. Still others find resonance with postmodernist sensibilities and deconstruction, notably illustrated in literacy and archaeological works. Some scholars emphasize the importance of narrative and stories in devising critical alternatives to prevailing legal practices. Many critical legal scholars draw upon intellectual currents in literature, pop culture, social theory, history, and other fields to challenge the idea of the individual as a stable, coherent, self capable of universal reason and guided by general laws of nature. In contrast, argue critical scholars individuals are constituted by complex and completing sources. Yeah, complex and completing sources of ideology, social practices, and power relationships. Despite their variety, CLS scholars commonly, one, seek to demonstrate the intimacy of legal doctrine and show how many given set of legal principles can be used to yield competing or contradictory results. Two, undertake historical, socioeconomical, and psychological analysis to identify how particular groups and institutions benefit from legal decisions despite the intimacy of legal doctrines. Three, expose how legal analysis and legal culture mystify outsiders and work to make legal results seem legitimate. And four, elucidate new or previously disfavored social visions, and argue for their realization in legal and political practices, in part by making them part of legal strategies. All right, so it then goes on. This website goes on to break down indeterminacy and so on and so forth. So once again, I will put the links to these websites in the show notes and everything. Please take a look at them and read them if you want to understand more as far as what the argument is concerning critical race theory and where it comes from, dealing with critical legal studies and so on and so forth. It just, when you look at this, it just takes away from the sovereignty of God. It cannot be that these disparities exist because God is sovereign, and that some people may have been lazy. It doesn't take it into account all these other factors that could be included, but it makes his main focus dealing with race or poor versus wealthy and everything else. And we even see in the scriptures where you could tell there are people who may have treated people differently because they were poor versus the wealthy and everything else. You can see all of that even in the scriptures. But what is the reason behind it? What is the ultimate reason? It is sin. That's the reason. That's the reason why you have people who feel differently about others no matter what going on. It's because of sin, right? Now, when it comes to LGBTQ, it's not because of sin that people are saying, hey, you shouldn't get married, y'all shouldn't be married, and what you're doing is not right. It's not because we're hating you. It's because it's against God. The act itself is against God. But having money isn't against God. The love of money is the root of all evil, but having it in itself isn't something that's against God. Even being poor isn't something that's against God. Neither does it say that you are less in the mind of God because you don't have as much as the next person, right? But it's taking away all of these factors that we know are true because God has revealed them through his word, and it's putting it all on race. Now, is racism an issue? Yes, it is definitely an issue. I don't agree that it's as big of an issue as people are making it out to be. Not today. Back then, yes, of course, but not today. A black man now, if he works hard and does what he's supposed to do, he can, and studies hard and everything else, he can go on to make a good success. And the same thing with the Latino and everyone else. They can do that, right? If they put in the effort, they can do that. So the opportunities are there. All right. Now, you talk as far as people making enough and making the same amount as the next person and all that, you have to take in the different factors that you need to be aware of. And you have to allow for those distinctions. You have to allow for those distinctions to be brought to the surface, and so we can draw some accurate information from them. But making blanketed statements are not helping. Generalized points of views are not helping the conversation go any further. We have to deal with things honestly. All right. So that's my conclusion with all of that. I hope this has been helpful for you. I hope that you found this meaningful. Please go back and look at this information and read over it. Study it alongside the scriptures. I'm not saying you put the scriptures lower. I'm saying, like, look at what God says concerning disparities. Look at how God handles disparities, how he calls for Christians to handle disparities and these issues and stuff like that. How does God deal with them? Is it a sin that these disparities exist? Is it a result of evilness and wickedness? Is it a result of whiteness that disparities exist? And if you look from the scriptures, the answer is no. The answer is no. And so, like I said, I just hope this has been helpful for you. Please join me next Sunday live on YouTube at 6 p.m. Eastern Time for the live streaming of the podcast. And you can also find us on various podcast apps, including iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and Google Play. So I look for you then. So thank you for joining me for this episode of Prescribed Truth Podcast. I look forward to talking to you next time. And also remember, in a world full of errors, the only thing that the doctor prescribes is truth. Blessings. All right. So no comments. All right. So everybody going to do their own thing on this Lord's Day. That's what's up. All right. So with that being, I won't stay on no longer. Then it is now 7:03. What? An hour? Hot dog. Did good. You did good, my man. Sunbeam forever. Okay, you still there with me? You hanging in there with me? Thank you for coming on in and joining with me and staying to the end. And thank you for letting me know you're still there. I sure appreciate that. I hope this has been helpful for you guys. Yeah. So matter of fact, before I end the stream, and I guess in case anybody else want to come in and say hello or whatnot, I'll go ahead and plug this into the descriptions. Well, I can do that afterwards. All right. So I'm gonna go and hang with the family and enjoy the rest of this Lord's Day before it's time for me to get ready to go to work in the morning. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your night. And until next time, yeah, hopefully next time. So outside of Saturday doing the Saturday subscriber chat hangout, I'm gonna try to find a day, and I'm gonna try to put something out here to let you know ahead of time. Try to set a day where I can just set a time when I just come on live and just stay on for about an hour, give people time to come in and take calls. Like that'd be the day I just do that. And so we'll see. So keep me in prayer with all of that. And so, other than that, grace and peace, and we'll talk soon.